on, guys? Today we are looking at Tristan da Silva, the forward wing from Colorado. Spent 4 years with the Buffalo as a senior. He'll be 23 years old when the draft takes place, and he's 6'9", around 220 pounds. So Tristan's brother Oscar played at Stanford, and now he's playing with Barcelona. So he's got that basketball family. Those people who he can, specifically his older brother Oscar, who he can ask questions about what's it like playing professionally. And that, I think, always helps a player when they can have a close relative, whether that be a brother, a father, a cousin, etc., who they can ask those questions to and get a better understanding of what life is going to be like. He is a guy who really knows his role, played within the system, and at Colorado averaged 16 points, 5 rebounds, around 2.5 steals, and he did so while shooting 49% from the field, 39.5% from 3 on around 5 attempts, and 83.5% from the free throw line around 3 attempts. Shot 56%, on his 2-point attempts and around 1.8 turnovers per game. So Da Silva is a guy who, got better, increased his role each year in college. He plays within the system, meaning that he's not a guy who's going to get the ball and try to go isolation and make, 7 to 10 dribbles. He knows how to play within his game. He's a really good catch and shoot player, especially from the corners, where it just seemed like he was obviously he made nearly 4% of his threes, but it felt like from the corners it was like 45%. He's also a solid defender, and there were times with the Buffaloes where they would play smaller and he would be guarding, forward or occasionally in the center. Sometimes they would have other guys do that like O'Brien or Hadley, but Da Silva really did a good job of guarding multiple players, keeping guys out of the lane. Averaged 1.1 steals, 0.6 blocks, so he does a decent job of affecting the game, whether that be turnovers or block shots. And he's a guy who I think could profile as a solid role player at the next level. In that 3-and-D kind of mold, helps he could be a good complementary asset to your stars. Now on the flip side, while he's a good defender, I wouldn't say he's like a great, elite lockdown defender, which is really not a bad negative to have. I would say more than anything, his assist to turnover ratio, 2.4 to 1.8. He's a little careless with the ball, and you see that at times when he's getting into the lane. He's not necessarily the most efficient with his movements as he's getting closer to the basket, and that does lead to turnovers. And it is an issue at the next level somewhat, because I don't think he's going to have as many of those opportunities, so I don't think those are going to be things that necessarily flare up. He's also not a great rebounder. 5 rebounds per game at 6'9", 220 is a little bit below average to where I would hope he would be at. And then lastly, he's a good finisher around the basket, around 64% in the paint, 63% in the paint, which is solid. I just don't think he's great inside the paint. And again, similar to his defense, where I'm saying he's good or above average but not great, it's not necessarily the worst thing. It just is indicative of the player that he's going to be. Whereas I think he's a plus on the offensive end, and I think he's like average, maybe slightly below average on the defensive end of the court. So would I draft Da Silva? Maybe. And I'm probably leaning to probably not. I think he's going to be drafted somewhere in the 20s to 30s. So like 20 to 40 as a rough range, but I think it's more likely going to be like 20 to 35. I think he's going to be a first round pick. And for that reason, with his age, and I think he's just a solid overall player who's a really plus shooter and can score. But in terms of the other side of the ball, I'm just not seeing it enough to say like I would definitely get him. So I think he's got a ceiling of a good role player who can come in and maybe get you 10 points a game off the bench, or maybe as a fifth starter on your team as a ceiling, and then as a floor, I could see him playing a couple years in the league and then bouncing around, maybe playing in Europe afterwards. So That's what I think about Da Silva. I do expect him to be drafted late in the first round, early second, as I mentioned.